Hello and welcome. This is a overview of Carl Schmitt's Land and Sea. At least this is the first section. It's gonna be broken down into about 4 or 5 different parts, I think. So, I'd say after reading this book, I kind of thought about what's the best way to kind of introduce it. And I actually think it's something like elemental geopolitics. Hopefully, this definition will kind of make sense as we go through the book. So, Schmitt will start the book out with what we could call some kind of basic anthropological geographic observations about the kind of spaces and habitats which humans live and dwell in. So he says, the human is a land being, a land dweller. He stands and walks and moves upon the firmly grounded earth. This is his standpoint and his soil. Through it, he receives his viewpoint. This defines his impressions and his way of seeing the world. He receives not only his field of vision, but also the form of his gait and his movements, his shape, as a living being born and moving upon the earth. Schmitt will point out that even though the earth is in the planet we live on, is 2/3 water, 1/3 land, we still call it Earth, even though there's a kind of disproportionate ratio of water to land, because we are essentially land-dwelling creatures. But there are also people who have tended more towards the sea, and other, I would say, aquatic environments. You can think of certain fishing villages, and as we will go through later, kind of merchant coastal cities as well. Schmitt will point out that there are people, and I would say still peoples who have a much more radical tendency towards the sea or towards the water. Schmitt will point out the isles of the South Sea, the Polynesian seafarers, Kanaks and Swaori. One recognizes still the last remnants of such fish mention. Their whole being, their conceptual world and language were related to the sea. To them, our conceptions of space and time attained from fixed land appeared as strange and incomprehensible, as conversely, the world of these pure sea humans, sea mention, signifies a hardly comprehensible other world for us land humans, land mention. So, Schmitt is sort of pointing out these radical distinctions in how we comprehend ourselves, our worlds, based on whether we are peoples that have, we could say, kind of tended or adapt ourselves more radically towards each of these elements. You can think basically here also of like agrarian peoples and people who live on fishing villages or towns. This is a kind of obvious distinction. And what we're really getting at here is significant sort of metaphysical and epistemic schisms between different sorts of peoples, based on what we could call maybe like their elemental inclinations, whether those be primordially land or primordially water. So we're sort of getting into sort of elemental thinking now. And this is very much not a study which fits into the predominant sort of natural scientific understanding of elements and of geography, space, matter, and so forth. Schmitt will write, already the question of what originary matter, basic matter, stem and root here actually mean would lead us into unforeseeable problems of natural scientific physics and equally unforeseeable problems of metaphysics and epistemology. Nonetheless, for our historical meditation, we can stick with the 4 elements. And by stick with the 4 elements, Schmitt is referring to the pre-Socratic understanding of the elements. So you've got water, earth, fire, and air. Rather than the modern scientific understanding, which divided everything up into, I don't know how many different elements. You've got 50, 60, 70 more different elements. Schmitt will stick to the sort of the basic 4. Schmitt writes, thus the elements of land and sea with which the following discourse is concerned must not be conceived as mere natural scientific quantities. Otherwise, they would decompose themselves into chemical material, that is, into a historical nothing. The designations which proceed from them, in particular the land-orientated and sea-orientated forms of historical existence, do not run their course in a mechanically compulsory way. If the human were nothing other than a living being completely defined by his environment, then the human would be accordingly a land animal, or a fish, or a bird, or a phantasmic mixture of these elementary designations. The pure types of the 4 elements, especially the pure earth humans and the pure sea humans, had little to do with one another. The mixtures would result in good or bad types and would cultivate friendships or enmities like chemical affinities or contrasts. The being and fate of the humans would be defined wholly naturally, like that of an animal or a plant. One could only say that certain ones devour the others, while others again live together in symbiosis. There would be no human history other than human deed and human resolve. Now, however, the human is a being which is not completely taken up with its environment. The human has the strength to historically conquer his existence and consciousness. The human is aware not only of birth, but also of the possibility of rebirth. In some distress and danger in which the animal and the plant are helplessly destroyed, the human can save himself from a new existence through his spirit, through unerring observation, through drawing entailments, and through resolve. The human has some latitude for his power and his historical empowerment. The human is capable of choice, and in certain historical moments, he can even choose the element in which he determines himself as a new collective form of his historical existence through his own deed and through his own achievement, and the element in which he organizes himself. In this sense, rightly understood, the human has, as the poet says, the freedom to break out where he will. So I suppose we could say that for humans, these elements are not things which merely determine our environment and then therefore determine what we are and what we do. These elements have a different sort of dynamic with human consciousness than they do for other animals. And I suppose that's because humans can adapt to different environments in ways which other animals don't really seem to be able to do. When environments change in history, for at least like an animal history, not human history, but like like the Ice Age or something, right? Or the dinosaur wipeout, or one of these big seismic shifts in the history of the Earth. Animals tend to just die out once that habitat, once those environmental factors significantly shift. Now, there is an evolutionary process over time. There is adaptations and so on and so forth. But I think generally animals are more subject to their environment than humans are. Humans have this capacity to control their environment, to adapt, to I suppose respond to these shifts. We have much more freedom in that regard than other animals have. And so therefore, and also our awareness of our relationship to the earth gives us this capacity, I suppose, not merely to be subjugated to these elemental forces, But we could sort of. I was actually thinking of the Promethean myth here. The fire being one of these four elements. We have this capacity to sort of have a dynamic with these elements, which sort of empowers us in a way, or gives us a way of conceiving of the world, which yeah, could basically empower us in a sense. And the reason that the same species could be a land animal or a kind of sea animal, we could say, or kind of land peoples and sea peoples. The reason there's this diversity in the same species, which I don't think exists in other animals, right? Like I don't think you have like the same. Like when I say same species, I mean like also you have to be able to mate with each other, right? So like a sea people could reproduce with the land people. Like these aren't like incompatible. You don't have that with other animals. Different species are kind of more fixed into one particular environment. If you put like a rhinoceros in the ocean, it's just going to drown. It's not going to survive. If you put like a shark in a desert, it's just going to die. Like there's no movement. There's no sort of ambiguity, elemental ambiguity there. For humans, there is. So here we come to the sort of observation, which kind of introduces the entire book, I suppose, which is that world history is a history of the battle of sea powers against land powers, and of land powers against sea powers. Schmitt refers to the French military scientist Admiral Castex in his strategic book, The Sea Against the Land. So this is not an entirely new observation. Schmitt is picking up from primarily actually military strategy, military science. He's sort of picking up on stuff which has already been written and observed in that area, and I suppose giving it a more general philosophic inquiry. But it's also got this zoological element to it. We're going to have this sort of bear versus fish opposition. So he says, for ages the elementary opposition between land and sea has been noted, and still near the end of the 19th century, it was a beloved image to depict the tensions of the time between Russia and England as the battle of a bear with a whalefish. The whalefish is a great mythic beast, the Leviathan, of which we shall have to hear something still. The bear, one of many symbolic representation of land animals. According to medieval interpretations of the so-called Kabbalists, world history is a battle between the powerful whalefish, the Leviathan, and the equally strong land animal, the behemoth, which is imagined as a bull or as an elephant. Both names, Leviathan and Behemoth, stem from the book of Job, chapters 40 and 41. Now, the Kabbalists say that the Behemoth exerts itself to rip apart the Leviathan with its horns and teeth, while the Leviathan, on the contrary, holds shut the mouth and nose of the land animal with its fins so that it cannot eat or breathe. This is as descriptive as only a mythic image is capable of being. The sketch of the blockade of a land power by a sea power, which cuts off the land from supplies in order to starve it out. Thus do both fighting powers mutually kill each other. So I think this kind of zoological distinction, particularly when it comes to geopolitics, diplomacy, warfare, military strategy, and so forth, it's actually quite prescient still today. Perhaps more than ever, in a sense. Although, as we'll learn later, there's another element to be introduced in our time, but we'll go through that later. So, the land expression of warfare, which I suppose is a bit more, it's spatially distinct insofar as that it's has a inclination to run into the zone of conflict, and sort of directly and kind of transparently deal with the aggressor, or sort of accelerate the conflict, like a bear, running in and tearing apart his prey, or his whatever, the intruder into his territory, or whatever. And I suppose in that sense, the bear could be associated a bit more with like traditional warfare, less technologically advanced warfare, warfare between like transparent battalions, one side versus the other side. There's a sort of short, intense battle, and then things end, and there's a winner determined. The sea expression of battle, the fish expression of battle, of which Schmitt says the kind of suffocation of the bear, by drawing it into the water and smothering it with its fins, could be associated more with the tendency of sea powers to use the ocean as the ocean always being a form, a route of transportation, particularly for resources and goods, to use control over those flows of resources and goods in order to starve out the enemy. And this is noticeable because certain forms of warfare today have really hurt civilian populations in ways in which they never necessarily used to. Collateral damage from airstrikes and drones and economic embargoes. You can think of Iraq in the 90s, when there was an economic embargo set on Iraq from the US, and it's estimated like 500,000 people were killed, or even 500,000 children, or some ridiculous figure. This sort of expression of warfare through or aggression through embargoes and through other forms of military power, other than a kind of clear-cut battle or a clear-cut sort of invasion, this tends to hurt the civilian population more than the land expression of warfare, even if the warfare itself doesn't appear to us to be as violent or as kind of aggressive or as explosive. So these distinctions are still very, very much with us today, I would say. So this is basically the end of this video. That gives us a good sort of grounding into what Schmitt is doing here with these elemental and geopolitical and zoological categories, we could say. So yeah, thank you.